A musket shot rips through the silence of a frozen river. The year is 1776. From 13 weary colonies, a revolution is born, not with crowns or gold, but with a wild belief: freedom. Farmers and dreamers rise against an empire where the sun never sets, fighting to prove that liberty belongs to all, not just the powerful. From that harsh winter will rise a force that opens the skies, splits the atom, and sets foot on the moon. This isn't just history, it's the impossible beginning of America. Before there was America, there were nations. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy governed with councils and consensus. The Mississippian cities rose along great rivers. The Pueblo people engineered civilizations in the desert. For thousands of years, these lands held stories we're only beginning to understand. Then, in 1492, a new chapter began as 3 Spanish ships appeared on the horizon. This wasn't a discovery, it was an encounter, a collision of worlds that would forever alter the course of history. The Columbian Exchange transformed 2 hemispheres, but with new crops and animals came something far more destructive. European diseases swept through indigenous populations with devastating speed. Smallpox, measles, typhus, invisible invaders that caused entire civilizations to collapse within decades. Yet this was not a story of passive victims. Resistance was immediate and fierce. From King Philip's War to Pontiac's Rebellion and the Seminole Wars, the original inhabitants of this continent would fight for their lands and their way of life for the next 400 years. Meanwhile, new settlements took root. Jamestown, 1607. The Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, 1620. The English colonies began to snake along the Atlantic coast. In Virginia, tobacco plantations fueled by an insatiable demand for labor rose from the soil. In New England, Puritan communities sought to build their city upon a hill, but this growth came at a terrible cost. In 1619, the first enslaved Africans arrived in chains. This was the nation's original sin, a deep and painful contradiction that would haunt it for centuries. Here, 2 competing visions of America were born, one of freedom and one of bondage, existing side by side. By 1750, the 13 colonies were no longer just outposts. They were thriving societies. Boston's taverns buzzed with radical debates. Philadelphia's printing presses spread dangerous new ideas about liberty and self-governance. Seeing this growing independence, Britain tried to tighten its grip. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, taxes imposed without consent. The tension mounted until it exploded. Tea was dumped into Boston Harbor, and in a moment that would be immortalized, British redcoats fired into a crowd, leaving 5 colonists dead on King Street. The colonists called it a massacre. The fuse of revolution was lit. Philadelphia, the sweltering summer of 1776. Inside the Pennsylvania State House, a young delegate from Virginia named Thomas Jefferson put pen to paper. He wrote words that would echo through the ages. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." The words were revolutionary, a promise of a new kind of world, even if the reality for so many fell tragically short. On July 4th, after weeks of heated debate, the Continental Congress voted for independence. There was no turning back. A nation was declared. But a declaration is just words. Winning a war against the world's greatest military power was another matter entirely. The winter of 1777 at Valley Forge nearly broke the Continental Army. Washington's men huddled in frozen mud, many without shoes, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Starvation and disease were constant companions. The revolution seemed doomed, yet they endured, they trained, they drilled, and they held on to the belief in their cause. By spring, they had forged themselves into a true army. Finally, at Yorktown in 1781, with crucial help from the French, they cornered the British. Against all odds, the rebels had won. A new nation, born from conflict and ideals, had survived its first, brutal test. Thank you so much for watching this journey through the birth of a nation. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let us know in the comments what Act 2, Growing Pains and Civil War. Philadelphia again, 1787. The states are fracturing. The Articles of Confederation are failing. 55 men gather to create something unprecedented, a written constitution for a democratic republic. Compromise after bitter compromise, big states versus small states. North versus South. On September 17th, they sign, "We the People." It begins. The experiment is underway. The Louisiana Purchase, 1803. The size of the nation doubles overnight. Lewis and Clark journey to the Pacific, mapping a continent. Settlers pour across the Appalachians in waves. Manifest Destiny becomes the rallying cry. But this expansion comes at terrible cost. The Trail of Tears forces thousands of Cherokee to march west. 4,000 die along the way. Progress and tragedy intertwined. Cotton becomes king in the South. The plantation economy depends on enslaved labor. In the North, factories rise and immigrants flood the cities. Two Americas emerge, increasingly incompatible. Frederick Douglass escapes slavery and becomes a voice for freedom. Harriet Tubman risks everything to lead others north. John Brown raids Harper's Ferry. The conflict can no longer be contained. April 12, 1861. Confederate artillery opens fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. After 34 hours, the Union garrison surrenders. President Lincoln calls for troops. The Civil War has begun. Brother will fight brother. Over 600,000 Americans will die. The nation is tearing itself apart. July 1863. Two armies collide in a small Pennsylvania town. For 3 days, the battle rages. Pickett's charge fails in a storm of cannon fire. The Confederate tide breaks. 4 months later, Lincoln stands on that battlefield and speaks of a new birth of freedom. The words echo through history. The war will continue for 2 more years, but the turning point has passed. The Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment. 4 million people emerge from bondage. For a brief moment during Reconstruction, formerly enslaved people vote, hold office, build schools. But the backlash is fierce. The Ku Klux Klan terrorizes the South. Jim Crow laws rise to replace slavery. The promise of equality is betrayed. It will take another century to be redeemed. Act 3. World Power and Modern America. Steel mills in Pittsburgh belch smoke into the sky. Railroads span the continent. Thomas Edison's light bulb illuminates the darkness. Alexander Graham Bell's telephone connects voices across vast distances. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan. The Gilded Age creates unprecedented wealth and unprecedented inequality. Workers organize. Strikes turn violent. The labor movement is born in blood. Muckrakers expose corruption. Teddy Roosevelt breaks up monopolies and protects wilderness. Women march for the right to vote. In 1920, the 19th Amendment finally grants it. Ellis Island processes millions of immigrants, Italians, Irish, Jews, Poles, seeking the American dream. The nation is transforming, its identity constantly being renegotiated. America enters the Great War. Doughboys cross the Atlantic and march into the trenches of France. The Battle of Belleau Wood, the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. When the guns finally fall silent on November 11, 1918, the world has changed forever. America emerges as a global power, though it will take another war for the nation to fully embrace that role. Jazz fills Harlem speakeasies. Flappers dance the Charleston. Cars roll off assembly lines. The stock market soars. Then, on October 29, 1929, it all comes crashing down. Black Tuesday. The Great Depression begins. Bread lines snake through cities. Dust storms bury farms. Hoovervilles spring up in parks. The American dream seems dead. Franklin Roosevelt's voice crackles through radio speakers. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. The New Deal launches, Social Security, public works projects, banking reform. The Civilian Conservation Corps plants 3 billion trees. Dams rise across the Tennessee Valley. It's not enough to end the Depression, but it gives people hope, and hope matters. December 7, 1941. Japanese planes attack Pearl Harbor. America enters World War II. Rosie the Riveter works in factories. The Tuskegee Airmen fly combat missions over Europe. D-Day. Thousands storm the beaches of Normandy, island hopping across the Pacific. And then, in August 1945, the atomic age begins over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Victory comes at an unfathomable price. An Iron Curtain descends across Europe. The Soviet Union tests atomic weapons. Nuclear war becomes possible. The Korean War. The Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, the world holds its breath. McCarthyism spreads paranoia. Yet America also reaches for the stars. In 1969, Neil Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat. Martin Luther King Jr. stands on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. "I have a dream," he declares. Freedom riders face violence in the South. Police turn fire hoses on children in Birmingham. In Selma, marchers cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge into a wall of state troopers. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. Progress, purchased with courage and blood. Helicopters descend into Vietnamese jungles. The war divides the nation. Protests erupt on college campuses. Kent State, the National Guard fires. 4 students die. The women's liberation movement challenges traditional roles. Stonewall, the gay rights movement begins. Watergate, a president resigns in disgrace. America is questioning everything, redefining itself yet again. November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapses. The Cold War is over. America stands as the sole superpower. The 1990s bring technological revolution. Personal computers, the internet, cell phones. The world seems smaller, more connected. A new millennium approaches with optimism. September 11, 2001. Planes strike the Twin Towers. The Pentagon, a field in Pennsylvania. Nearly 3,000 dead in a single morning. America enters wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The war on terror reshapes foreign policy and civil liberties. The nation grapples with fear, security, and its role in the world. The first African-American president takes office in 2009. The Great Recession tests the economy. Social media transforms communication. Movements rise. Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, Me Too. Climate change becomes undeniable. A pandemic sweeps the globe in 2020. Political polarization deepens. The nation faces questions about democracy itself. Here we stand, a nation of over 330 million people, descendants of indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans, children of immigrants from every corner of Earth. We carry the weight of history, the triumphs and the tragedies, the progress and the setbacks. The experiment continues, imperfect and unfinished. From 13 colonies to 50 states, from muskets to nuclear weapons, from slavery to civil rights, though the work remains incomplete. America's history is not a straight line of progress. It's a constant struggle between ideals and reality, between the promise of freedom and the persistence of injustice. The founders wrote words they couldn't fully live up to. Each generation since has fought to expand their meaning, to make all men are created equal, actually mean all people. That struggle defines us, the indigenous nations who survived, the enslaved people who never stopped dreaming of freedom, the immigrants who crossed oceans, the workers who organized, the soldiers who fought, the activists who marched, the ordinary citizens who voted, who spoke, who refused to accept the status quo. America is not perfect. It has never been perfect. But the idea at its heart, that government should serve the people, that rights belong to individuals, that power should be limited and checked, that idea changed the world. It inspired revolutions. It toppled monarchies. It gave hope to the oppressed everywhere. As we move forward, we carry all of this with us. The achievements and the atrocities, the innovation and the inequality, the courage and the cowardice. Understanding this history doesn't mean celebrating every chapter. It means learning from it, growing from it, using it to build something better. The American experiment isn't over. Every generation must renew it. Every citizen must participate in it. The question is not whether America is great. The question is whether we have the wisdom and the will to make it more just, more free, more equal than it has ever been before.